Good afternoon, everyone. I hope all of you have joined the day so far as much as I have. Lucky for all of us, we have two more great events to go. The last one is the reception in Annenberg Hall, and I hope all of you can make it. But before we get there, we were really fortunate to have the opportunity. You don't want to miss my joke here. To hear another outstanding, entertaining, and thought-provoking speaker. Now, I know what many of you are probably thinking right now. You've seen one Clay, you've seen them all. We're here to shatter that myth. In fact, I can personally guarantee that after hearing this next speaker, you'll never think of that again. I am truly honored with the opportunity to welcome and introduce Clay Shirky and to publicly thank him for joining us today. This Clay is an associate professor at NYU in both the Interactive Telecommunications Program and the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. He is the author of two recent books on social media, Cognitive Surplus, Creativity and Generosity in the Connected Age, and Here Comes Everybody, The Power of Organizing Without Organizations. That last title sounds like it was written about Harvard. Clay has written extensively about the internet since 1996, and that was even before Al Gore started. And his columns and writings have appeared in Business 2.0, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Harvard Business Review, and Wired. His impressive background and bio is too long to go through at this point. However, I would not be doing his background justice if I didn't mention his most important accomplishments and affiliations. As far as his most important affiliations are concerned, despite what Google might suggest, Clay is currently a fellow here at Harvard at the Berkman Center, and in 2010 was the Edward R. Murrow Visiting Lecturer at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School of Government. As for his most important accomplishments, I didn't want to have to choose amongst his many impressive ones. So instead I asked him what the one thing about his background that could not be found on Google that he would like me to share with all of you. And his response was, when I was 3 years old, I named my rocking horse Brain Saddle. I don't know if he's going to explain that in his presentation, but if not, hopefully he will join us at the reception afterwards so we can all learn more about Brain Saddle. Please join me in welcoming Clay Shirky.
Thank you all very much. And if you have your Clay speech scratch-off cards, now's the time to get them back out. So I want to talk about a particular part of the SMAC-V model. I want to talk about social and mobile, which is to say I want to talk about the stuff that's changing the way people interact, not just the way computers interact with one another, not just the way data interacts with one another. I don't want to be that guy that doesn't have your job but tells you how to do it. So what I want to do instead is talk about places where the academy is coming under pressure and also the academy is recognizing opportunities, again to echo Professor Christensen's last question of this morning, because all of those things are happening all at once. And rather than talk about that in the abstract, let me just start with a story. This is, you will recognize this sort of thing. This is a bug reporting platform called Bugzilla used by Mozilla. And this was a bug filed some years ago. And the bug report began in an unusual way. Here was its first sentence. Ruh-roh. Right, so the bug report goes on. The user says, when I logged in and tried to use the tool, it said, here's a list of all the sites whose passwords you haven't cached. JDate, Match.com, and the list goes on. And she goes on to write this. So, this is a bug reporting platform. Here is a privacy flaw in this browser. Somebody comes in from Mozilla and says, okay, I think you've got this wrong. Firefox actually doesn't care what these things are stored. And the comment goes on for a while, and then it gets to this. So, it's obviously the case that people who don't work with technology, and even some members of our tribe, have this fantasy that there is a world of humanity and there is a world of technology, and that occasionally they interact, but that they can be kept largely separate. When you see a bug reporting platform turn into a relationship advice column, that fantasy goes away. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the ways in which all of the ways human beings behave are starting to change the design of these tools, and the way that the design of these tools is starting to adapt to those pressures, especially with reference to our special institutions, the academy. So here is a student, one of the people we serve. This guy is named Chris Avenir. And a few years ago, Chris Avenir turfs up as a freshman at Ryerson University. And in his freshman year, he takes Chemistry 101 and discovers, as freshmen have done since time immemorial, that Chemistry 101 is really hard. So he says, I know what I'll do. I'll join a study group, as freshmen have done since time immemorial. But because it's the 21st century, the study group he joins is on Facebook, because that's where people congregate. So he joins a Facebook study group for this chemistry class. In fact, he likes it well enough to become an administrator. And then one day, he gets a note from Ryerson. He's being called up on academic charges. He's being called up on 147 academic charges. One charge for being the administrator of this group, and 146 additional charges for each of the other students in the group. Ryerson University's position on this is absolutely clear. This is cheating. What that kid did is cheating. We caught him, and we're going to bring him in to talk to him. Doesn't matter what kind of media it is, we know what this behavior looks like. To which Avenir's response is, you create spaces on campus to host study groups. It's not like you don't know that students are studying together. What's the difference if we do it online? So what we've got here is a clash of metaphors, right? Is Facebook like any other publishing platform, just in cyberspace, or is Facebook like any other social gathering, just moved to the digital realm? And the answer is, that's the wrong question. Because the thing Facebook turns out to be a lot like is Facebook. It has a set of characteristics that aren't like other things. If it didn't have those characteristics, it would not have become the first billion-person social network. Here is our dilemma, right? These tools are being brought into our environment whether we want them or not. They are general purpose capabilities of any participant in the academic enterprise. And there is no set of metaphors for the way we used to do things that will completely contain the new characteristics, the new capabilities, the new affordances. We have to think through carefully, and from first principles, how are we going to integrate Facebook into our environments as just one example? Because we can't say it's just like publishing, and we can't say it's just like a study hall. Because it's a bit like either of those things, and it's a bit not like either of those things, and it's a lot like a lot of other things. Cheating is a real worry. It's not just like we can let anything go, but at the same time, it's not like we can make everything stop. So we have to adapt. That's no longer our choice. Right. Now, this is part of a general change, right? Anybody who has been in an IT department, particularly in an academy, long enough, has seen the original function of the IT department, the kind of back office function, come under this kind of pressure. Right. The IT department has historically been regarded as really nothing more than a set of digital janitors. Nobody knows when the job goes well. Everybody notices when the job goes badly. That period is ending. The disadvantage of that period ending is the lack of predictability. The advantage of that period ending is that now changes in IT, choices made about the way we support digital data and digital communications, are increasingly affecting the core architecture of the institution. And I mean that absolutely literally. This is a floor plan of my home institution, the Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU. The spots in red here, this is a plan from 2004, the spots in red here are where we bolted a computer to a desk in order that the students would have access to computers, software, and the internet. This is from 10 years ago, and I want to call your attention in particular to this room here in the lower left corner. That room was our firmware lab. We do a lot of work on small microchips, and we use two kinds of microchips, the BX24 and the PIC chip, and we had to license the firmware for them. And because we had to license the firmware, we had to have dedicated laptops running that software. Because the laptops had to be dedicated, they had to be bolted to the tables, and the tables then had to be put in that room. That's what that was for. At the end of 2004, we said we're moving off of proprietary chips and onto a platform called Arduino, which is open source hardware. And so we walked into the firmware lab and we said, well, if we've got open source hardware, then we don't need the firmware running on the laptops anymore because any student can run it on any computer. So let's unbolt the laptops. But if we don't need the laptops, we don't need the tables. So let's get rid of the tables. So now we got a room full of chairs. Well, maybe we'll take the chairs out. So we're standing in an empty room trying to figure out what to do with it, right? This is a high-class problem in New York City, to have space you don't know what to do with. And finally somebody says, do we need the wall? No, we don't need the wall. So, about a month after we switched to an open source microchip, there's big guys with crowbars ripping out the wall. And we opened up the rest of our physical computing lab. A small change in chip architecture led to a literal change in the architecture of the institution, right? These things now ramify up and down the stack. IT, by being increasingly not a back office function, but the substrate of the academic conversation, changes in one place ripple through the whole system. This kept going, right? By the time we do this, we're down to 2 rooms, right? 2 of our 9 rooms instead of 4 are now computer workstation rooms. But of course, the laptop revolution keeps going, and eventually it's all bring your own device. We keep seeing the students come in, sit down at a workstation, flip up the keyboard, push it against the screen, put their own laptop down and start to work. We think, well, this is silly. So we get rid of all of the computer workstations. And now the floor looks like this. And we think to ourselves, a big part of what we sold people as their tuition was that we had access to hardware that they didn't. And now we've just gotten rid of all the computing hardware. What do? So moving with the alacrity that is typical of faculty, we said to ourselves, let's form a committee. And after we had taken the bold decision to form a committee, but before we had actually done any work, the students answered the question for us. They said, free space, we've been waiting for this. And they moved in and they colonized the space, and it became a collaborative workspace. That's what the institution needed. It was only the faculty that didn't know it, right? That kind of change, bottom up, you make a resource available, somebody else presses it into service. We could not have thought of that. The students could not have thought of that. It was not a matter of sitting down and planning. It was a matter of making the resources available and seeing what use the institution put those resources to and how it used them. This is a general theme throughout the academy, throughout the academic conversation, right? We would like to believe, we faculty especially, that we're in charge, that we're smart enough to plan in advance, that we know what's coming. We do sometimes, but we don't sometimes, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. So we have to open up resources for people to try new things. And if we do that, I think we can expect to see incredible experimentation in scientific, literary, artistic, and political creation of the highest order. We also get a lot of lolcats. And anytime you make the argument that the internet in general and social media in particular is going to transform an institution, people say, wait, The thing with the cats, is that what you think is going to be? To which you have to say, yeah, the thing with the cats, that's what I'm talking about. But here's the thing. This always happens, this emergence of stuff like lolcats. And I don't mean this always happens with the internet, although the cats do always happen with the internet. I mean this always happens with media, full stop, right? When the printing press came along, it did not take very long before the first erotic novel was printed. When the printing press came along, it did not take very long for someone with a commercial interest in a printing press to say to themselves, hey, you know what I bet people would pay for? It took another 150 years for people to even think of the scientific journal. Right? So the idea that there is media that is inherently silly and other media that is inherently serious is itself a silly idea, right? All media has always been used for silly things. All media has always been used for serious things. The difference is who's doing the using, right? We got erotic novels because the printing press was the kind of technology it is, and we are the kind of people we are. We didn't get the scientific journal until people said, what else can we use this thing for, right? We get lolcats because we're the kind of people we are, and the web is the kind of medium it is, right? We will not get the good new uses of this technology until people who have a need for it say, what else can we do with this? So if we ask ourselves, where in the academy is this stuff going? Where in our institutions are we seeing these kinds of patterns? One of the things we can see is a general rise in collaboration. Ben Jones, a researcher, a faculty and researcher at the Kellogg Institute, studied 20 million journal papers and 2 million patents. And what he found across that entire range of academic publications is that the amount of collaboration has been going up steadily in the academic enterprise. In 95% of scientific subfields, there was an increase in team papers. The size of the teams cited increases on average about 20% a decade. Among papers with 100 citations or more, they are 6 times likelier to be co-authored by a team than written by a single person. This is what Christensen was talking about this morning. This is the place where innovation is being driven from the edges of the system. Now, some of this is just about the rise in complexity of the world, right? More people need to contribute in order to see more sides of a large, hard problem. But some of it is being driven by economics. If a sociology professor can collaborate with a mathematician to make a sociogram, if a psychologist can collaborate with an economist, then neither of those people need to have their institutions sponsor a department of behavioral economics. They can do the work across institutional barriers. The only kinds of institutions that might be at risk of not taking advantage of economically driven collaboration are institutions that are large enough and rich enough to think that they can go it alone. If you know of any institutions like that, you should tell them to worry, because this is the rebar, right? The low-level collaboration, the kind of convenient, I'm going to reach across the departmental matrix, I'm going to reach across the institutional matrix because there's not enough money at home, that's the stuff that is the beginning to drive the collaborative pressure here. So, the key thing for us to understand in this environment, right, is that exactly as Christensen was saying this morning, it's the people reaching for the simple, cheap solutions that are going to surprise us. And part of the surprise is going to come from the fact that there is a much greater demand for learning than there is a supply of education. The stuff we have a monopoly on is not the only stuff people want. So here's a site, Rap Genius. Rap Genius does pretty much exactly what it says. You can go and there's all of 50 Cent's lyrics. Every one of 50 Cent's raps is up there. You click on one. People can annotate it. You can understand why he wrote the lyrics the way he did. And within a few months of Rap Genius's presence on the web, people realized that the green on black design notwithstanding, this in fact was a general purpose tool for text annotation. And other kinds of things started to show up, like the Mayflower Compact. Right? And people began annotating the Mayflower Compact. They annotated Apple's terms of service. And this became an environment where people began exchanging and pooling what they know about these written documents. Those people wanted to learn. They didn't need educational certification, and they didn't have to reach for educational tools to do it. They just needed to reach for tools that allowed collaboration. This is one of the things that I think is essential to understand in academic IT. Our ones and zeros are not special. They are the same ones and zeros that everybody else uses. So when you start to see things like Facebook study groups and Rap Genius annotation platforms, you should take a look at the vendor pitches we all get in a new light. There are some advantages to having software written specifically for an academic environment, but they are almost all managerial advantages because you don't need special tools to help people learn. In fact, people's demand for learning is so enormous that they will take tools never designed for that purpose and press it into service. That's where a lot of the innovation is coming. So, if I could give, and I do give this advice around NYU a lot, advice to anybody thinking about educational technology. The key thing is not to think about which technologies or which tools or which goals. The key thing to start with is we need to get over ourselves, because we are so steeped in a system which is so ancient that it's easy to forget that first principles are different from the current system. Think about the current system. Here are the big 7 pieces of metadata we all deal with. There's lots and lots and lots more metadata. There's student ID numbers and semesters and all the rest of it. But class, course credit, grade, department, subject, and degree are the big ones. Many of our systems are set up to assume those as absolutely background metadata, and not a one of them is real. They are all stock-keeping units. And you need stock-keeping units, but you make a terrible mistake if you mistake the stock-keeping units for the actual thing you're doing. Here's what we're doing, at least in the classroom. This is what is real: teacher, learner, and artifact. Whether the artifact is a book or the artifact is a video, that's the encounter that's real. The metadata is just built up around that to keep track of it. And so when we think about teacher, learner, artifact, a lot of what's going on in the outside world that is outside of the academy but inside the desire to learn starts to make more sense. Here is the famous MOOC, the MOOC that launched the Year of MOOCs, run in Norvig's artificial intelligence class in the fall of 2011. And they, although everyone talks a good game about participation, they launched this without a participatory platform. And so you think, oh, those poor students, right? They're just having to learn on their own. But of course, they didn't sit still for that. They said, exactly as Chris Abner did, oh, this is really hard. And so they built their own subreddit entirely for this class. Right? They started their own meetups. In New York City, there were 168 members of this class. I don't know where the laser pointer is. There were more people meeting about this class in New York City than people were enrolled in the largest artificial intelligence class in a physical classroom in any institution in the world. Right? The students don't wait, and they don't use tools that look academic. They are co-inventing the infrastructure around us. When it is lacking, they are not waiting, they are not petitioning, they are simply taking advantage of what's out there already. So where is this going to go? Where is this kind of thing going to go in the academy? And the answer is, it's going to go everywhere that people interact with one another, which is to say everywhere. And we've seen this pattern before, at least those of us old enough to remember. The personal computer did not come into the organization because forward-thinking CEOs said, I want to empower my employees. The personal computer came into the organization because the accountants couldn't stand the mainframe guys, right? The accountants would have to walk down the hall with a bundle of paper. Could you batch process this? And the mainframe guys would say the next morning, oh, there was a mistake in it, it didn't run. And you do the whole thing again. So when VisiCalc came along, when the first spreadsheet came along, finally there was a reason to drag a personal computer into the side door. That's how these technologies come into organizations. Right? If you'd asked any salesperson in any business in 1995, or if you'd asked any CEO in any business in 1995, does your organization use email? They'd have said, well, we're evaluating that. And if you get the salesperson's card from that same business, there's an AOL address on it, because they didn't wait, right? That's how instant messaging came in. That's how the tablet came in. Bring your own device. All of this stuff comes in sideways. Your tribe has to deal with it, but the doorways in which technology is brought into these institutions are much wider than just what a contract is signed for. So where is this going to go? Let me point out some places where it's already happening, right? So, the library, the centerpiece of many academic institutions. There's an incredible amount of work on library technology, licenses that make born digital data friendly to the library's goals. There are concept maps that link books together based not on departmental choice or syllabus, but on their co-appearance on users' reading lists. People are reviving the idea of a shelf not as a place to keep books, but as a place to keep similarity, so that they're starting to look at the metadata that has always been around the library, but has mainly been treated as a shopkeeping effort. Any place you have metadata in-house, as long as it doesn't violate FERPA or students' privacy, there is considerable potential advantage in exposing that to the public or to the users to see what they do with it. Those kinds of experiments are going on everywhere. It's going into textbook publishing. Keith Devlin, a mathematician, wrote his own textbook and then ended up writing a post saying to all of his fellow mathematicians, this is so much easier than going the traditional route. If you know LaTeX, which most mathematicians working digitally do, you should never work with the traditional system again. This is not within any academic context. This is just out in the blogosphere. But he is urging his fellow mathematicians, whose ear he very much has, to simply abandon the traditional way of doing things. Right? It's happening in fieldwork. Right? An Xiaomina, an amazing ethnographer, travels the world studying memes, and her principal documentary tool is Instagram, which has been the punchline of a joke countless times. Jon Stewart spent 5 minutes making fun of it when it was bought. It's certainly never designed to be useful for academics, and yet there it is. Tricia Wong, her collaborator, goes even further. Tricia has published her entire ethnographic method. I don't know how well you can read that posted, but Tumblr, Foursquare, Flickr, the iPhone, Gmail, Twitter, Facebook, Evernote, Dropbox, and Instagram. Not a single piece of non-consumer technology there. Right? The needs of the people doing the advanced work have so far outstripped the Academy's ability to supply these tools that we're now seeing this kind of hybrid innovation. Right? And then there's this. This is the last story I want to tell about the changes in the environment, because in a way it is the most significant. It's the heart of the research university, which is the creation of new knowledge. Tim Gowers, who's a Fields Medal winning mathematician, posted a post a few years ago called, "Is Massively Collaborative Mathematics Possible?" And in the post he said, could we do this a new way? Could we do mathematical research in a large, messy group? And in particular, could we give up on the thing we have been doing since time immemorial, which is going away and thinking hard for months at a time, and only coming back when you think you have the right answer? Could we instead just throw out all the only partially wrong answers and combine them and see what happens? Right? So they decided to try it. And they put up something called the Polymath blog and the Polymath wiki, and people came along and they did exactly what Gowers had said, which is they just started making lists. So here's something for Polymath 4, the fourth problem they worked on, and it was a particular way of finding prime numbers. And everybody just threw out possibilities and argued about them, and there were a lot of false starts and there were a lot of dead ends, but eventually they got to something, right? This is cutting-edge mathematical research being done on consumer blogs and wikis. And then they said, all right, we think we've got something. Let's bundle this up, and we will send it to the Journal of the Mathematics of Computation. The Journal of Mathematics of Computation receives this paper, they read it, good news, they accept it, they send back an editorial document, here it is. Read that list. Now, I like proofreading as much as the next guy, and I may need it even more than the next guy, but the journal is not doing much to add to the world's store of mathematical knowledge here, right? And then there's this, my favorite sentence in the whole thing. The paper doesn't say who the authors are, right? As if, surely this is an oversight. Clearly the person writing this could not imagine that the paper didn't say who the authors are because it isn't actually clear who the authors are. Because this way of working is so unusual that you don't end up with a clean list of names. So, problem solvers that they are, the people on the Polymath Wiki say, well, all right, let's invent a list of authors. We'll put up a wiki. If you think you were an author, list yourself, right? And this is socially patrolled. If I'd gone in and listed myself, they'd have struck me down instantly. No one knows me. I'd done no work. It's not completely fake. But what they're doing at this point is backforming the actual process that works into something that looks like the ancient process because the journal won't accept good work if it doesn't look like it was done the old way, right? That's when you're up at angle iron, to borrow Christensen's description from this morning. That is when the quality of this process has outrun the ability of the existing tools to keep up. And at this point, when people are faking an author's list in the format that the journal wants just to get it into the journal, it might as well not be the Journal of Mathematics of Computation anymore. It might as well be the Journal of Eichen has tenure, right? Because it's performing no function other than stamp, right? Consider that change. That is one of the big changes. And what Christensen said this morning about the integrated system turning modular is exactly this story. Academic journals used to be in the business of increasing the speed and the radius of the spread of new ideas. And now they are in the business of decreasing both. If you go into a digital library, you will find that people typically spend, for their electronic journal collections, they typically spend more on security than hosting, which is to say, within our own communities, we are now spending more of our own money and effort trying to prevent people from getting access to ideas than we are trying to support those ideas. At that point, the business model of the journal and the mission of the academy are so out of sync that something somewhere is going to give. So let me end with one macro scale observation, which is about the institution's view of itself. Here's a picture of people watching the Super Bowl. This is a still from a sitcom. This is what TV people think watching TV is like. And it's very much the view we in this institution want to have of ourselves, right? The students are all riveted by my lecture. Alas, for me, not true, but it's still the model that we're asked to live up to. This is a picture of actual people watching the actual Super Bowl. Right. This is what we have to adapt to. The tools, the services, and critically the social expectations of the people in our environment now include an assumption of lateral contact across a much wider range than we are used to. It is going to be our job to catch up with them. Thank you.